Hi everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to discuss a concept I've touched on in several previous posts, which is triad pairs. Having an understanding of triad pairs and being able to utilize them can be really beneficial for constructing distinct chord voicings that imply the harmonic function of the scale that the chord comes from. We can also use triad pairs within our single note phrases when wanting to bring out the character of a specific mode which we're trying to imply within our solos. So in this video we're going to break down the process for finding the triad pairs for any mode, with the focus on sounds coming from the major and melodic minor parent scales. I'll also show some examples of using triad pairs to create modal voicings, and if you stick around to the end I'll break down a phrase you can use to spice up and enhance your blues phrasing, as well as it demonstrating how to apply triad pairs within a single note line context. You can find PDF material on my Patreon page, which you can check out to help you understand and use this concept further. Links are below in the description. For anyone new to the channel, my name's Robbie Barnby, and this is where I share videos discussing ideas that will help develop your musicianship. So feel free to hit the subscribe button below and follow along with more posts. With all that said, let's get into this concept. So, triad pairs are essentially when we use two triads that are both diatonic to the chosen scale or mode. In theory, this could be any combination of diatonic triads. However, we're going to focus on using major triad pairs. The reason for this is because the sound of a major triad is a very strong and stable sound, and it's probably actually one of the most recognizable sounds within our Western music. So when using a triad within a chord voicing or single note phrase to imply a specific harmonic sound, the major triads are going to be a strong choice. The definition we'll use for generating a triad pair is two major triads found next to each other within a harmonized scale. Picking two triads that are next to each other will ensure that the two triads won't share any of the same notes, and therefore will give us 6 different notes, so basically almost the whole 7-note scale, but organized into two very strong sounds, that being the two major triads. So let's take our C major scale. If we harmonize the scale into triads, we get a C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then back to C. The two major triads that are next to each other are F major and G major. So the triads built from the 4th and 5th degree of the scale. Already by playing a 1-4-5 chord progression, our ear has sort of settled into the sound of C major being the key, because we've organized the scale into these strong, stable sounds. This is also often why we're given these sounds before needing to identify an interval, for any of you who have been to music college and taken an ear training exam. Now, we can also experiment with the minor triads that are next to each other as well. However, to me, the minor triad is not as much of a strong sound compared to a major triad. It's also worth spotting that within the context of a major parent scale, the two minor triad pairs, which are found on the 2nd and 3rd degree, are just the relative minors of these major triad pairs. So back to our F major and G major triad. As well as these being the triad pairs for C major, they are of course going to be the triad pairs for all of the modes coming from C major as well. So instead of needing to learn the placement of where the triad pairs are for each individual mode, we just need to be able to identify the parent scale and know that the triad pairs are found on the 4th and 5th of that parent scale. For example, if we wanted to know the triad pairs for D Dorian, instead of needing to learn that the two major triads next to each other in the harmonized scale of D Dorian are found on the flat 3rd and 4th, we can just identify them by thinking of the parent scale of D Dorian, which is C major, and then remembering that the triad pairs are F and G, as that is the 4th and 5th. This means we only need to learn the placement once instead of 7 times for each mode. However, after some practice, and when you start developing some ideas using this concept, we won't be thinking about any of this when we're playing. We'll eventually just develop natural ways to instantly visualize the triad pairs for the harmony and fretboard positions we're playing in. So, as already mentioned, having the knowledge of triad pairs and being able to effortlessly access them is such a useful tool when wanting to bring out the sound or color of a mode. Let's try this with the E Lydian scale. Lydian is the 4th mode, and so the parent scale of E Lydian is B major, as E is the 4th of B. Now the triads found on the 4th and 5th of B major is an E and F sharp major triad, and so those are our triad pairs. Again, once you've done that process many times for each mode, the less you'll need to. After a while, you'll instinctively just know where the triad pairs are from the perspective of the mode you're playing over. Now let's experiment with these two triads to generate some Lydian voicings. Starting with the E major triad. In this case, an E major triad over E doesn't really give us anything that implies a distinctive Lydian sound, as it's just the root 3rd and 5th. But F sharp over E does provide intervals that bring out a Lydian flavour. Those intervals being the extensions of the chord, so the 2nd, sharp 4th, and 6th. When pairing these two triads together by playing them consecutively with E in the bass, this will get us into the sound of this mode. Here's an example of moving through each of the inversions for these two triads. So a very cinematic, John Williams-esque way to end a tune. So already we can start to see how this can help us generate different Lydian chord voicings by playing F sharp triads in various inversions and then finding an E in that position to put in the bass. We can now get a bit creative and experiment with voicing these triads as spread triads. This is where we take the middle note of a closed position triad and put it up or down an octave to create a much more open sounding voicing containing larger intervals. Now this is going to work great for most of the other modes from this same parent scale, especially for the more modal sounds like Dorian or even Mixolydian. So I recommend experimenting and using this as a way to generate some interesting voicings. The next thing I wanted to discuss was the same process for the modes of the melodic minor. But before we do that, here are some cool pattern exercises which you can do to master your triad pairs throughout the entire fretboard. So this is an exercise that cycles through the inversions of a chosen triad pair played as various single note patterns. Let's take the triad pairs of the G major parent scale, which is a C major and D major triad. What we can do is start in a position towards the lower end of the fretboard and cycle through the inversions of C major and D major while staying in that position. Back down. And now that we've covered that position, we can move to the next one and work our way up and down again. And so on. We can move through each position without stopping until we cover each position of the fretboard. This makes for a great triad pair workout. I've written up a series of PDFs for this containing the full workout for this exercise, and I've also included other pattern variations as well. For example, we can change up the direction of how we play the triad inversions. We could play each C major inversion starting from the lowest note going to the highest, but then play down the D major inversions while we still ascend through both triads. We can then play the descending combination that matches. There are several pattern variations which I've written out that are really fun to try. We can also get creative and add chromatic approach notes or certain rhythmic placeholders that allow us to voice lead and connect both triads as you move through their inversions. That's a fun one. Finally, I've also included all of these exercises for spread triads too. That gets pretty tricky. Moving on, let's quickly discuss the triad pairs for melodic minor, as this scale contains incredibly useful sounds. The good news is that the major triad pairs for melodic minor are also found on the 4th and 5th degree of the scale, so everything we've just looked at and talked about can be applied to the modes of melodic minor as well. So let's take an A altered scale and generate some voicings using triad pairs. The parent scale of A altered is B flat melodic minor, and the 4th and 5th of B flat is an E flat and F major triad. So those are going to be our triad pairs. The altered scale is one of our favorites for generating dominant tension when we have a cadence where a dominant 5 chord resolves to a tonic. So let's try and generate some voicings for A altered, starting with the E flat major triad over A7. So we get an A7 with a flat 9 and a flat 5. This works really well when creating tension that wants to resolve to D major, as A7 is our 5 chord and D is our tonic. If we do the same thing but voice the F major triad over A7, we bring out a sharp 9 and a sharp 5 tension. So really functional voicings. Let's try it in the context of a turnaround. To finish off, and as promised, let's take a look at how we can incorporate this sound into our single note phrasing and apply it to a blues context. The phrase we'll look at starts on the first bar of a 12-bar blues form and finishes on bar 5. What we're focusing on here is using the altered scale on bar 4 to create dominant tension that wants to resolve from the 1 chord to the 4 chord. We'll do this in the key of A7 and use the E flat major triad over A to create the altered tension that resolves to our 4 chord D7. Here's the phrase. So let's break down what's happening here. As mentioned, this is over the first 4 bars of a blues where the dominant 1 chord, A7, moves to the dominant 4 chord, D7. We're able to use a dominant tension on the 1 chord before moving to the 4 chord because we can treat the D7 as a temporary 1 and have the A7 function momentarily as the secondary dominant of D7. Now the phrase starts just by playing some blues language. And then from there, it straight away goes into using arpeggios built from the flat 7 and also triads coming from the altered scale to create this sort of tension-based line. There's your E flat triad. And then from there, it just continues down the altered scale before resolving to the 5th of the 4 chord D7. As we know, using the E flat major triad over A gives us an A7 flat 9 flat 5 tension, which comes from the A altered scale. This triad works especially well in this scenario as E flat over A moving to D7 can be seen as a sidestep approach or even a tritone substitution, which voice leads really well. Now, something also worth mentioning, before using the E flat triad over A, the phrase uses a G major triad. G is one of the triad pairs of A mixolydian coming from the D major parent scale, and G over A implies an A7 sus sound. Now the line actually plays a full G major 7 arpeggio, which provides an A13 sus sound, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's nice to enhance the altered tension by setting it up with a less tense dominant sound before it. For example, if instead of being in an A dominant blues key, but in the key of just A major instead, and still moving to the 4 chord, if we add the secondary dominant in between the 1 and the 4, so something like A major, going to A major 7, going to A dominant 7, and then resolving to the D major, that'll sound like this. You could keep going with the voice leading. Anyway, you can hear how by playing that A major 7, going to the A dominant 7, creates that real striking momentary tension and desire to want to resolve to the 4 chord. But in a blues context, if we're already playing an A dominant as the 1 chord, then it's nice to add something to help turn that A7 from sounding like a 1 chord, but instead sounding like a 5 chord tension that wants to resolve to D7. If we're playing in the diatonic key of A major, then just that change from A major to A dominant is enough to create that tension. Whereas with a blues where we're already playing A7, it's nice to do something to enhance that, to make that sound more like a 5 chord for that moment, as opposed to a dominant 1 chord. Using the altered is great for this, and by playing an A7 sus before it, helps set up this A7 tension, making our ear hear this A7 as more of a 5 chord in this moment, as opposed to a 1 chord as we've been hearing it. Now, the reason the A7 sus is less tense is because it has fewer flattened notes compared to A7, and especially A7 with a flat 9. And therefore, what we're sort of doing there is creating this gradient of tension where we have a dominant chord with the least amount of tension, going to more tension, which finally resolves to the 4 chord, or in this case, a dominant 4 chord. So playing a major triad or major 7th chord off of the flat 7 of a dominant gives us this sus sound. And it's also worth spotting that G major is the relative major of E minor. And so technically we're kind of playing or implying a 2-5-1 movement here, because E minor going to A7 or E flat over A, our tritone sub, resolving to D major, or in this case of a blues, D7. Well, this is just a 2-5-1, and that's exactly what a 2-5-1 is. The 2 really is the 5, but with lesser tension. It's a sus chord. So by including this into this phrase, we're kind of getting a bit of sophisticated jazz language within our blues phrasing, and who doesn't love that? So on the PDF, I've included other possible fingerings for this phrase and different rhythmic variations as well, so you can check that out for a deeper study. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like if you found it helpful, as that will really help push the video out to more people wanting to learn this stuff. As always, huge thanks for watching, have fun practicing, and I'll see you in the next one.